beach with Baking Blind. And lots of this trip has all been about how disability isn't the end of the world. But that's not always the case. Sometimes it can have really serious consequences. And I wanted you to hear from my friend Jo, whom we also served together in the Navy, about her experience in her family of dealing with a really serious and awful condition. Jo, tell us about you and Nick and ALS, which we know in the UK as motor neuron disease.
Well, yes, I went through training when I was trained to be a physical therapy assistant, and you learn about diseases that may impact your patients. And one of those is ALS, which is Amyotrophic Lateral Sclerosis, which in the States is also known as Lou Gehrig Disease, after a famous Yankee baseball player. And in February of 2008, Nick and I went down to Paraguay to see our oldest son, Jeffrey, who was in the Peace Corps. And there was a lot of moving around, lots of walking and on and off buses. And Nick was always behind me. I said, come on, Nick, can you walk any faster? And there was one time where we were getting off a bus and he had to kind of jump down a little bit and his knees buckled and he fell. I was like, oh, for God's sake, And he would also wake up in the middle of the night with Charlie horses, like leg cramps. Yeah. And I would say, drink water, have a banana, you're obviously a potassium.
Really sympathetic.
Very sympathetic, come on. Anyway, so we get back and gradually as the months went by, things were getting worse. He developed foot drop on his right leg, which means that when he tried to walk, he couldn't pick up his toes to clear the ground. So when he turned 65, he went to the doctor. He never went to the doctor. Perfectly healthy, took a multivitamin every day, and he asked the doctor why he was walking like a dog. So they ran all sorts of tests and ruled out any kind of spinal stuff or anything, and eventually he was sent to a neurologist who did a very painful exam, which is an EMG, where you stick muscles deep, you stick needles into the muscle fibre and look at the readout and see if they're firing or not. And this woman, and I won't describe what I feel about her, she's not one of my favourite people, I've never seen her again. She was, I went to this little test that he had because I didn't want him to do it by himself.
Sure.
And he was sitting there in his little blue gown, and she turns and says, she just looks at the readouts and says, well, I believe you have ALS. You have 2 to 5 years, you'll become gradually paralysed, unable to move, eat, drink, finally breathe, and you'll die.
Wow, that's fairly...
Yes, and that pretty much, that is what it is, but there could have been a bit more empathy. So I was just distraught because I knew what the end game was going to be. I immediately, like when I read a book, I go to the end of the book, I immediately jumped to the last days and thought, how the hell are we going to deal with this?
Yeah.
And it was just, he was just in a state of shock. So anyway, so August the 13th, 2008, he got his first diagnosis of ALS, and then being me, I wanted a second opinion. And we went up to Charlottesville to the University of Virginia and fell into a wonderful neurology department up there.
Yeah.
And he was actually in a clinical trial because the thing about ALS, there's no known cause, there's no cure, and there's no effective treatment. So once you get it, it's a death sentence. And it can last anywhere from, some people die within a year, and some people last, like Nick did, for longer, but he was on a ventilator for the last 3 years of his life.
So is that a ventilator with a tube down his
throat? It was not down his throat, it was through his trachea. It was a tracheotomy, so he had a tube going through, tube there. So what happens with ALS is that the motor neurons, which control everything in your body except for bowel and bladder, or eyesight or hearing, die, so that they stop sending signals to the muscles to move, so you gradually become paralysed.
And so how did you manage, both of you, and your 3 children, how did you cope with all of that?
Well, you just sort of got on with it. I knew enough, because I knew what was going to happen, I was pretty good at planning ahead.
Yeah.
So when it came to getting equipment for him, if they wanted to give him a particular kind of equipment that I knew wouldn't be that effective for that long, would use up some of his health benefits, I'd say, no, forget that, I'll borrow one, this is what we're going to need in the end. When we had the addition built to the house, because I knew we'd end up probably on a ventilator, I got more electrical outlets, so you could plug in the ventilator, the suction machine. We have a generator, because obviously if power goes off and the ventilator stops, you die. So I did learn, a couple of times I actually did have to, we had some issues and I had to bag him, which is where it's a bit like doing CPR, but you bag him through the trach so that they're getting air in.
Yeah.
And ALS in the States is service connected, and because Nick was a Navy veteran, we actually got help from the Veterans Administration, which was huge.
Yeah.
Because I've always told people that if it hadn't been service connected, it's a hell of a disease to get, but at least we had help in the home.
Yes.
Because trait invented, you need 24/7 help. And it would bankrupt you if you didn't have that help.
Because you built quite a large extension on the house.
We did, yes we did, and then just somebody has to be with him because he can't communicate. The way I used to describe him, and some people were like, oh my God, he was a mute quadriplegic with an attitude. Because his brain was fine.
Yes.
I mean, he did all our finances, he did our taxes until the day he died, pretty much.
And how did he manage all of that?
Well, we had a hospital bed that did percussion vibration to help keep his lungs clear because he couldn't cough or clear his lungs or anything. And you could turn the hospital bed into a chair, and then because he was like a Raggedy Andy rag doll with no muscle control, we would prop him up with pillows, we'd tie his head up with a scarf to the side rail,
Yes.
and then we had a spring attachment where we put his elbow in a little cuff and also his wrist, and there was a little spring coming up to an overhead piece. It's actually a feeding attachment that people use. And then we made the mouse left click, and we would use tape and tape his finger to the mouse so he could do lateral movements. And then with enough, once he could go up and down, he could depress the mouse, he could move the cursor. And that, as time went by, that got more and more difficult for him to do. And we did a lot of lip reading.
Yeah.
But as the muscles around his mouth went, that got harder. So there was a lot of guessing and so forth. But somehow we made it work. And his until the very end, he had very expressive eyes. I mean, you could kind of tell what he needed. Oh yeah. Actually, you might want to edit this out. But one of his three, well, I can't remember his third one, but one of his favourite words was fuck and moron. So those were very clear. You could still, because those are quite hard syllables, so you can still, if all the mushy syllables and consonants or vowels are gone, you can still get out that. So yeah, he was typical Nick because you knew him, before I did. So he just went on, and he was fully involved in everything with the kids. He had a power wheelchair, we had a handicapped van. I'd take him to concerts. He went to a ball game, a couple of ball games, and then at the end, his body just had fought so hard there was nothing left to give.
It just exhausted.
It just exhausted him. Everything was spent. There was nothing else. But he was, it was August 13th, 2008 to October 3rd, 2014. So 6 years. So he did outlive what the original doctor told us.
Just out of spite.
Out of spite, I think. Yeah. And,
well,
he's been
perhaps she did achieve something then.
Maybe she did. Yeah. And he never questioned it. He never became self-pitying or whiny. It was just like, okay, that's the card I've been dealt. Let's get on and cope with it. So
but
that's what we did.
You've talked now about all the practical sides of coping, but that doesn't really reflect the level of emotional impact that's had on you and the children and on him. How did all that go?
Well, I never cried at home, because if I cried at home, he'd cry. So there's one time I did, and we just made a pact that I wouldn't do that. And what he liked to know, because my mother died just before he did, and so I went to England for her funeral. So I actually went to the funeral home, and I figured out what would happen if he died while I was gone. And so I would always tell him what the plan was, so that he wasn't worried. So he would know, and that, I think, any kind of reassurance I could give him, and he trusted me completely.
Of course.
And so that, and in some ways, when all you can do to communicate somebody's kind of look in your eyes, it does bring a certain different level of emotional intimacy to a relationship. Even if you can't, I never heard his voice for the last pretty much 4 years of his life, because his voice changed. And he couldn't raise an arm to hug me. I would just kind of lift an arm up and put it around me and have him hold me. But we communicated on a higher level. It's not been easy.
Soul to soul.
Soul to soul, and he was, I don't have any regrets about how he died. He was ready to go.
And was that a comforting death?
It was actually, yes. He was in the hospital, the local hospital, in ICU, and I've got all the kids. Jeffrey was actually in New Orleans, but he flew back, so I got all the children. I got the 2 nurses who were like our children. Charlie and Louise were there. I called his sister in Seattle because I figured that even though he was lying there actively dying, I figured he was still here.
Sure.
So I put friends, relatives, whomever on speakerphone, and held it up to his ear.
Yeah.
And then everybody, I could go in individually and say goodbye to him.
Yes.
And then right at the end, talked to the doctor, said, you know, this is just, I'd like you to give him some morphine because morphine will take away any pain he may have had, although
Yes.
there were no indications of pain, but it suppresses your breathing.
Yeah.
So we decided to do that. I held him in my arms. The nurse turned off the ventilator, took the tube out of his throat, and I just whispered in his ear, you know, you're the best thing that ever happened to me. I love you. And he took like 3 breaths, and he died. And that was it. Yeah. And then sort of first year as a widow was sort of a cushion of grief. Second year was way worse, and I've been told year 2 is harder than year 1. Year 3, I kind of was coming through it, and now I'm in year 4, and it's not like I'm skipping down the hallway, but it's getting easier to reflect without getting tearful.
Yeah.
And what I do is I focus on how many years and days we had together, and I'm going to have to be 88 before I lived longer without him than I've lived with him. And I hope I make it, but that's kind of how I'm doing the balancing. It's don't regret what you've lost, be grateful for what you had and carry that forward with you.
And that's a really courageous way forward, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if you were trying to sum up your experience for somebody else another family with a member who has ALS, what would be your sort of key thinking for them?
Oh my goodness. I would say just be honest with each other. You know, it's a death sentence. So for 6 years, I saw him die. And what was so hard is there was nothing I could do, or the medical establishment could do to stop it. So you're going to get cross with each other, and that's okay. But you're going to love each other, maybe even more than you did before. If you don't have help, reach out to people. I tend to do things by myself and don't ask for help, and that may have been an error on my part at certain stages, so I just became overwhelmed by it all. So there's a whole network of people out there who want to help you, so reach out for that. And laugh, cry, enjoy life, enjoy the time you have. I mean, it sounds very kind of sappy and hallmark cardy, but you never know. Just got to sort of buck up and get on with it and move forward.
And life is progressing now, isn't it?
It is, yes. It's not as sad as it used to be. I used to have, look on this day on Facebook, ooh, and that's like, that was a happy memory. Happy memories. I mean, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those kind of bolster you up, and grief will come and it'll, push you down, but it'll get you through. And once you, every time you go through these waves of grief, you kind of get more used to accepting that the worst thing you can do is fight it. If you fight the grief, it's never going to go. So you've got to, some days you may just kind of curl into a ball, some days you may try to fight it, but you've got to accept the grief, move through it, let it push you forward, get up, and honour their memory by moving on. You can't be a little sad, little sack about it.
I don't think you're a sad little sack at all. I think you're doing really well.
Well,
and and I think the other thing that has been really strong is that we've talked about him lots and lots, haven't we?
We have, yes.
And I think often people are frightened about talking about somebody who's died.
Yes, they are.
But we're not doing that. We're talking about him. You're showing me pictures. We're having reminiscences about him. So I think when people have died, they still live on while you remember them.
Yes, absolutely.
And you have to actively remember.
You do. Yeah.
And not just all the good bits.
No. He was not a freaking saint, I'll be telling you that right now. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Buddy. Oh, okay. And here he is, the man of the hour.
Next time, see me cooking in Chongqing in China. All the recipes are on my website, www.bakingblind.com.